All right, it's 2:01. Why don't we get this show rolling? Well, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining this webinar where we will be discussing APIs, API management, API security, and the joint solution of Wallarm and Kong. So this should be a fun one. We got a good panel. Just a couple housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides will be emailed out shortly after we close this out. So you will get that. I think that's probably good enough. And from a comments perspective, if you could, this is always a fun one, both on the LinkedIn side and here. Why don't you, in the comments, throw where you're joining us from? It's always good to see where our audience is. And then lastly, from the Zoom side, we're going to be running a poll in a sec. And we'll try to share those numbers for those of you joining on the LinkedIn side, but just again, get an idea of the demographics of this audience. So without further ado, let's jump in and introduce you to the panelists. From Wallarm, I have my esteemed colleague, Tim. Tim recently joined us, so I'll let him do a quick intro.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm the field CTO and VP of Customer Engineering here at Wallarm. Our goal here is to make our customers happy and to provide solutions for them. I've got a lot of different backgrounds. What I tell most people is if you want to know more about me, just head over to LinkedIn and just grab a look at my profile.
Next, joining us from our amazing partner over at Kong, we have Andrew. Happy to have him with us. So Andrew, why don't you do a quick intro?
Thanks, Rick. Hi, my name is Andrew Kew. I'm a technical account manager and field engineer at Kong. I've been an engineer for the last sort of 15 to 18 years or so, working across multiple different industries. So yeah, I'm here today just to talk through the APIs and management and the great relationship we have with Wallarm. So nice to meet you.
Thank you, Andrew. And lastly, joining us from Revenera is Jiju. We've known Jiju here at Wallarm for a little bit, and it's been a great resource. So Jiju, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, this is Jiju. I work as a director of engineering at Revenera. It's been a good 18 years with the industry, and I'm here to talk about how we implemented Kong and Wallarm in our solution, and to get feedback from all of you. Thank you.
All right, so now that those intros are in, let's at least actually on the Zoom side, I'm going to launch a poll just to get an idea of where everyone sits in their stack. Some of you, are you using API management? Do you have API security combination? Are you at an earlier kind of maturity stage of just using Nginx reverse proxy or something like that? Maybe none of them. So just trying to get a feel for where we should guide this conversation. So that's up, and I see people are filling it out. Tim, I'm going to move it to the next slide and give everyone a little bit to fill that out, and then we can talk through the results.
Sounds good.
There we go.
So I think one of the big reasons why we're here and why we're excited to be doing this with Kong, and super excited to have Jiju, our special guest here. APIs aren't going away. They seem to only be getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more and more. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is, APIs are a lot like glaciers, where you've got some outside, some with partners, and then you've got a whole ton that you may not know underneath with private APIs. And that's really where Kong and Wallarm really fit in well together. Kong and Wallarm have very similar roots to how we do traffic control, and that's why we're excited to be here. It's as we'll show you throughout the presentation, there are many different ways to utilize Wallarm and Kong together. There isn't a right or a wrong approach. It's just what works best for you. And we'll talk about that a lot at the end. We may save the whole last half hour for that matter, for that conversation. If you know anything about me or been around me at all, you know, I'd much rather talk to customers than flip through slide decks. So we'll try to go through these slides really quickly. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kong and Andrew to discuss a little bit more about what Kong is, and then we'll talk about what Wallarm is, and then we'll have a conversation with Juju on what he did and how he did it, and then we'll just have a little roundtable on really different ways that we can implement and the pros and cons of some of them. So Andrew, take it away, sir.
Brilliant, thanks, Tim. So effectively what you were talking about, Tim, as well, is the number of APIs that are out there. And I think most companies are going down the route of they've either got, sort of hundreds of APIs, or they're looking to move down, breaking up monolithic systems into microservices and more APIs. Maybe they're looking to monetize them, or, having a lot of internal APIs. And effectively, what they're needing, if they're not using it, is some kind of way of managing those APIs. And that's where an API gateway comes into it. An API gateway, think of it as like your public interface to your microservices, to your upstream systems. And having that kind of additional layer to your architecture, I think, can come with a number of different benefits as well. There can be benefits from reducing of cost. And that can help you with doing things like retiring, or consolidating a lot of your infrastructure. There's also a lot of reducing of fragmentation as well, especially when it comes to like a lot of policies or functionality that a lot of your systems share. You can, reduce that fragmentation by bringing it into a centralized layer where everything can be managed. And also helping, your developers, your engineers that are building those APIs, and actually giving them the ability to, plug it, I suppose, get that functionality pluggable and choose, which policies they want to apply to which of their services. Again, helping them with maybe discoverability, what services are there in your estate, what's out there that they can use, and then obviously the usual improving on availability and resilience of your platform as well. All of these effectively give you that derived benefit of increased time to market and security of all of your systems. Next slide, please. So this is where the API gateway can help, and this is where Kong can help as well. Like I was talking about fragmentation, I think, probably the old way of doing things was each system effectively, writing that functionality, writing those policies within themselves. And you end up with this fragmentation of features across all of your estates, all of your systems. When you want to do something like make a change, let's say change something like a TLS version, you then have to make that change across the board, across all of your microservices. And that then becomes a major migration process that you have to manage, essentially governing all of that and putting it into that single layer where the gateway is, gets you away from those massive migration projects where you maybe want to change the authentication method, or you want to change, like I said, the TLS version, maybe even adding a layer of observability or security as well, which is obviously the topic we're going to be talking about today. So having that centrally governed, and this is where Kong can help you, is definitely the way forward, the way to go, and it's the way most organizations are moving towards. Next slide, please. So looking at a sort of security model from an API standpoint, very high level components. There are probably three high level categories. You're looking at authentication, and authentication is effectively validating the identity of the consumer that's trying to consume that API. Then moving on to authorization. So maybe your consumer has authenticated themselves, but do they have access to a particular endpoint of your API, and being able to control that authorization? I think giving yourselves that fine-grained control of all of your microservices within your estate. And then finally, threat prevention, taking sort of measures to defend yourself from DDoS attacks or injections or any other third sort of external threats. again, as I've already spoken about, where do you manage all of these components? You could do it within the APIs themselves, or move it into this centralized API layer. And this is again where Kong comes into play. So how can Kong help us with all of these? Next slide, please. Kong effectively has plugins or policies, and you are able to configure these policies, sort of on a service or root layer, and it gives your developers or your platform DevOps engineers the ability to configure things at this platform API gateway layer. With authentication, you can do anything from basic authentication, so username or password, all the way to OpenID Connect, which is an industry standard way of authenticating using JWT tokens. Authorization using something like OAuth 2, giving you that fine-grained control using things like scopes or groups or roles, allowing you to again define which parts of those APIs they can actually access. And then finally, threat prevention. Anything from rate limiting to IP restriction, maybe even some kind of bot detection, or using a third-party system to give you sort of a more complex, detailed way of threat prevention like Wallarm. And that's effectively why we're here today, talking about Wallarm and how you can get a lot of benefit from the threat prevention that Wallarm can offer you within the Kong gateway. That's it. Over to you, Tim.
Sounds good. Rick, did you want to do the poll results now? All righty.
Yep, just shared them with you. Looks like we have a pretty even distribution, where 27% are just using an Nginx or something similar at this point. Roughly 20% are either using just API management or using just API security. And another quarter or so are using the combination, and then a final kind of 10% aren't really using anything. So, maybe just here for education, but I think we got a pretty even distribution. So I'm guessing we kind of run the gamut from early maturity through being more mature.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's wonderful to have all sorts of different folks in different stages of their journey. And I think with Wallarm, I think that's the interesting part is we've been on a journey for the last 5 or 6 years as well. We've got 2 products right now. We've got our next gen WAF, as well as our advanced API security. And we'll talk a lot about this. But honestly, the big thing is intrusion with APIs are still the #1 threat with API security today. If you don't have a good intrusion built system, which is what we've built our genesis on. It's where we came from. It's where we're derived from. If you don't have those underpinnings, API security is really tough because those intrusions are our #1 places. If you're not looking deep in payloads, if you're not looking for SQL injections, even in your APIs, that is really hard to block and mitigate things. So our product is made up of 2 things, API security and the WAF. The WAF is built into our API security. We added onto our WAF for the API security threats. And we'll get into API discovery because that's a big thing. Everybody wants to know about all of their APIs. If you know anything about our stickers, we've got zombie APIs out there. We've got shadow APIs. The big thing here is just knowing what you have and knowing that if it's changing or if it's not changing. That's the real big thing with API discovery. Next slide, Rick. One of the big things that you need today is not just a single way of communicating with your customers. We find many of our customers are doing lots of different protocols. You've got GraphQL, you've got gRPC, especially on the internal side. If you're doing large binary data, you've got WebSockets, especially on the HTTP 2.0 environment, REST APIs, and the bottom line is all of those are necessary to protect, not just one or a few. And with Wallarm, you get all of those, right? That is included in our API package. You'll get GraphQL and gRPC. These are really hard to protect, and there's not many in the industry that are doing all of these protocols, which is why this is really, really important. And so we give a comprehensive protection against API threats. We've got API discovery and inventory, which is really, you got to know what you have before you can protect it. That's really important. We also protect against clearly the API security top 10 or the OAuth API top 10, as you'll hear about them. API threat prevention, virtual patching, and I won't read all of them, but these are, if you don't have these threats being looked at by your security system, I would ask you to take a look at a different product that would really step up. The JWT attacks are coming in, the sensitive data exposures you're coming in, you're hearing JWT attacks being created from breached tokens from lots of different places. So really important security things that we want to talk about. And then I think the question is how do we implement all of this? And I think, you know, that's why we brought Jiju here. And I think it'll be fun to talk to him. I think this is my last slide, right, Rick? Oh no, we talked about how we integrate. Forgot about the integration. That's the important thing. So like Kong, you know, and Andrew can help me where and dialogue this with me. I think like Kong, there's a number of different ways that we implement together. One of them is on the ingress side. So Kong is a Nginx based product. Wallarm is an Nginx based product. So we marry really well together at the ingress if you're using Kubernetes. If you're creating golden images, we actually can be rolled right into your golden image. And so we've got lots of different ways we integrate with Kong, and that's really why we work so well together, is because of the speed at which your threats can be detected and returned before they get to Kong, to take some of that load off of Kong. There's lots of Helm charts, Terraform charts. So our plugin is a little different than most of the other plugins with Kong. Ours is actually a native plugin to Nginx, which makes us just a little bit different, but that's where we get the speed from. And that's really important here. For us, it's all about speed. When you're putting an inline product in with your traffic and your customer traffic, speed is really, really important. And it is to Kong, it is to Wallarm. And for us, this is the best way that we saw to integrate with each other. Andrew, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah, no, I think you've said it exactly that way. You know, I think effectively anything you're adding into production is going to, you know, you're always going to worry about latency. So I think the fact that, you know, the way that Wallarm sort of integrates into Nginx, it's an Nginx module, gives you that, you know, reduction in latency. You almost don't see it effectively, and that's what you want. You know, you want the ability to be able to be viewing that production traffic going through rather than looking at it after the fact. You know, that kind of live view of everything is effectively what you want. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Let's go to the next slide. And I think this is really where we fit well together, right? This is just another view of that, right? You've got authentication, authorization being done in Kong. You've got ACLs, you know, MTLS. If we integrate in at the ingress point in Nginx, MTLS stays intact, so you can continue to use your MTLS while using Wallarm. Cores and rate limiting still can be done in either place. So especially if you're doing internal rate limiting to the APIs. So if you have APIs hitting APIs, do those right inside of Kong. And then, you know, Wallarm, you know, we're really on the threat prevention on the public side of things. You're looking at your OWASP top 10, like we talked about, and the API abuse, API scoring, malicious bot traffic, and really anything that you would normally see in an API security product. But mostly it's really around protecting against those OWASP API top 10. And every year those change. You know, I learned things new since I've been here. I've been at Wallarm for, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks. And I always knew about the API security top 10, but how many people know those actually change? I did not know that they change, and they do. It's actually been very much a learning process since I've been here. So so it's really important that you know that you're protected against these attacks. Andrew, anything to add here?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. I think ultimately, the two tools complement each other. I think Kong still does really well with regards to security and threat prevention, but I think Wallarm adds that extra layer. And I think having that kind of security layer at that point, above your services, above the microservices, your system, your internal systems, is important. And I think without that, you're almost flying blind. So I think it's I think that whole kind of complementary of each other as tools is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So like I promised, we flew through those slides, which is exciting for me. I like flying through slides. We're going to introduce Jiju here to our conversation. So Jiju is a great customer of both Kong and Wallarm's. Why don't you talk a little bit about who Ravinia is, what they do, and then maybe a little bit about, I think the next slide is your architecture.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Tim. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to be associated with this webinar. So let's get right to it. So Revenera is a 30-year experienced company with over 50,000 customers across its various product lines. It's a subsidiary of Flexera Software LLC. Now, where do we really help? Okay. So we help software producers to license their software and to make sure that only people who have purchased the software can use it. Okay. Now, if you look at the statistics from Gartner or Forrester, 37% of all global licenses or of all global software licenses are unlicensed. And that is a $46 billion problem. Okay, and in US alone, there is about $9 billion worth of software that is running unlicensed. So we help software producers try and mop up all of that revenue, try and plug that revenue leakage, right? We track software usage and report any license compliance issues or overages. Not that you want to go and beat up your customers, but convert all of these into interesting business opportunities, right? Our tools can be used regardless of whether you sell your software as SaaS software, embedded software, or basically traditional software in your server environments or in your on-premise environments. And if you're a product manager, right, we let you know how your customer is using your software. So you can better plan your features, and if there are areas of the product your customers rarely use, why invest engineering time in trying to build features in that space, right? And coming to the other section about open source, right? 90% of all software is really open source, right? But there is only this bit of companies that really care about what their open source license compliance position is. Do they use any GPL software? Do they use LGPL software? How do you attribute the open source licenses to? So there is that whole problem of open source license compliance, and there is also this problem of open source vulnerabilities, right? We've heard about the Spring vulnerability, we've heard about the Log4j vulnerability, made headlines. But every company using huge amount of open source software in its product stack can have vulnerabilities that they have not really cared about. So we, as a company, we help uncovering all of those vulnerabilities. We help companies find out their open source license position, license compliance position, and also their vulnerabilities in their software stack, and help in mitigating them. Now, in a nutshell, what do we do, right? We help software producers deliver the software in a very compliant way and make the most money of it, and learn about the usage of their software so that they can build the future course of their software. Okay, so next slide, please. Now, why? So why Wallarm, why Kong, what was the real need, right? The biggest product in our portfolio, namely the Flexnet operations product, needed to go an architectural transformation, right? Through the years, we have broken the system down into a set of services, but now we need to get into the big leagues and deliver high performance, and we needed to break it down further, right? And another aspect of this journey is that the software was being delivered from our own data center, and we are moving all of this into the AWS cloud. And we are also transitioning ourselves into a more API-centric software than the traditional software. Our existing stack consists of, among other things, consists of an Apache web layer, which is very relevant to this conversation. And it has got 10 years of work on it. So that means 10 years of worth of configuration changes that has led to it being a wiry mesh of configuration. And that's why when doing this architectural transformation, we started looking at the API gateway. Now, I'm not going to go into why we need API gateway. Andrew has covered all of that. Okay, but from our perspective, the most important thing is, with API gateways, you can have a lot of dynamic configuration as opposed to static configuration, which are in config files with Apache server or an Nginx server. And why exactly Kong, right? And Andrew talked about a good amount of features for Kong, but what really got us into this was the extensive availability of features or availability of plugins, sorry. So the number of plugins in Kong really impressed us when we were trying to compare between the different API gateways, and that gave us an unparalleled power. And the next most important thing that caught our attention and sold us was the Kong community. It is a really vibrant community, and you can post all sorts of problems and get reasonable good answers or good pointers in the direction that will help you solve your problem. So those are the two things that made us decide that Kong is going to be our API gateway. Okay, and why Wallarm? Tim covered a lot of advantages of Wallarm. And when moving to this new architecture, we wanted to make the API security right front and center. And that's why we did choose Wallarm. Wallarm also has this engine that does profile your requests and fine tunes your security rules according to the traffic that it is receiving. This is something that we did not see in any of the other API gateways. Many of them required us to tweak rules ourselves. And that was not our forte, and that's why we decided about Wallarm, right? Challenges in our journey, I'll come to this after the next slide. Maybe Rick, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is how we have deployed both the solutions into our product. Our product, the newest product, has reached UAT. We are aiming to reach production by end of January. We don't want to disturb anybody during the Christmas break. We are ready, but Christmas is vacation time. Okay, where are we? Okay,
I think what's interesting about this is very different than the picture that we had 3 or 4 slides ago with how we integrate together with Kong at the ingress. So you didn't do that here. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, why don't I take people through the solution?
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
And then come back to your question. Okay. So it's pretty nothing out of the ordinary. We have the AWS ALB that is terminating all our SSL. And then we have the ECS cluster that is running our Wallarm scanners. And after scanning the traffic is being forwarded to a Kong ingress controller on Kubernetes. And we have our ingresses. And our upstream services can either run on ECS, they can run on EKS, or they can even run on a bunch of EC2 instances. We don't really care at the API gateway, but we route traffic to all of them. And the ECS cluster, Wallarm running in ECS cluster is connected to the Wallarm cloud. So where it sends all of those attacks and vulnerability information and receives newer set of rules and things like that. So yes, coming to Tim's question, there are multiple ways of doing this, and we chose this for two reasons, right? So if think of an operator, right, who is debugging a problem, in real time. Okay, so probably they are gonna suspect, okay, there is some problem with Wallarm, right? We need to take off the Wallarm system just offline for a few seconds or a few minutes, debug the problem. Then we need to be able to cut over traffic from the ALB directly to Kong. In that case, that's one of the reasons why we put it out separately. We might argue that is not an optimal approach. Yes, there are pros and cons. And the second reason is when you're really debugging problems with the gateway, we needed to be able to differentiate between what are pure routing problems and what are problems caused by some rules at Wallarm, right? So we, of course, all of them would appear as 403s, but we needed a clearer separation to help our engineers debug the problem. So those are the two reasons why we separated this out. I know the recommended approach is to integrate with a golden image on the Kong side. Tim, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know that there's a right or a wrong way to do this, right? That's what I love about being in technology is there are ways that work for your solution or for your environment and for the situation that you're in. Like you mentioned, your journey, right? So we all seem to have come from somewhere. We don't get to get rid of that history of 20 years of building technology. And I think, the flexibility of Kong and the flexibility of Wallarm allows our customers to do many different things. And that's, what was really exciting to see you on the meeting with us is this is a way, right? There are some things that we lose, and maybe Andrew can talk about, if we do it this way, what inside of Kong do we lose? But I think it's really important to understand that everything has pros and cons, like you said, Juju. So Andrew, what do we lose by putting Wallarm outside of the ingress controller for Kong?
I mean, I think probably only one of the main considerations that I would see from this kind of configuration of your architecture is probably around latency. So anything, if you have services or APIs that are very, latency sensitive, having an additional layer could effectively add, the additional amounts of latency that could push it over the edge, So it's very dependent on your requirements. So depending on the APIs you've got, what's their sensitivity to latency, and then taking those requirements and deciding which configuration is best for you and for your infrastructure. So like you said, there's not one way, and that's why we offer multiple ways to integrate together, because effectively take your requirements and then work with which configuration works best for you, I think is the way to go.
Right. So coming back to the challenges that I parked. So what are the challenges that we faced in the journey? So we when we started integrating all of these pieces, we faced a little bit of memory issues with Kong, but thanks to the help to our friends at Kong, we were able to get through all of those issues in good time. We had too many routes to which we were routing, and we needed to tweak some of those memory parameters. And Wallarm 2 had its fair share of trouble, but especially around ECS containers restarting with some weird messages. But our friends at Wallarm were extremely helpful in helping us get over this problem. But we are now running in a very, very stable shape. So those are the two major challenges that we face with Kong and Wallarm. And of course, we had our own set of challenges bringing the Apache configuration down into Kong. And we had a lot of challenges, but those are the internal stuff. We had great many hidden rules, so to speak, but we got through all of them. Yeah. That's pretty much it. And yeah, maybe as one final challenge, both of these Wallarm and Nginx, Wallarm and Kong use Nginx. So we ran afoul of some of the Nginx parameters, especially around the amount of data that you can send in a request. We were doing some heavy uploads and stuff. So we were running out of the client max body size parameters. So we had to adjust that both at the Wallarm level and at the Kong level on the Nginx. So those are the challenges, but we got through them.
Yeah. And you know what so go ahead, Andrew, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess in a way, yeah, that leads into quite nicely another, sort of not con, because I don't want to say the way that you've designed this is a bad way, because it's not, is, you effectively have an additional layer you have to configure as well. So, I guess you do get the benefits of being able to sidestep it, but then you also have to, like you said, make those configurations at 2 layers, and then ensuring that those configurations are synced across both layers, and then working out, if you do have any issues, how you, but a lot of that can be maintained by, CI/CD pipelines and golden images and all of that. So there are a lot of ways of maintaining it as well. So.
Yeah, and that's really where I was going to go, Juju, is how do you manage all of this? Do you do automation through all this? I would think so.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, because I think that in and of itself is a story about how both Wallarm and Kong work very similarly together.
Okay, so we are 100% automated. We use GitHub Actions for our automation, and we get a lot of metrics from ECS. We were basically a Datadog house, but for Kong, we noticed that Kong throws a huge amount of metrics with Prometheus than the Datadog. So we introduced Prometheus just for just for Kong, and we are driving a lot of metrics from both, getting a lot of metrics from both Wallarm and Kong, and we use that to take decisions. Whether it is restarting pods or whether adjusting a few things. We have GitHub actions that can be triggered based on these metrics. Okay, so it's fully automated. It's almost a zero-touch system. But when we get into production, we are sure to get to scenarios where we have not yet automated, but we will automate them for sure. Right.
Yeah. And what I appreciate about this conversation is the fact that no solution is perfect. And sometimes when you listen to webinars, I feel like people are talking about how perfect everything was. And with Juju here and Andrew's been in the industry for a long time, and so have I, nothing is perfect. Right. The only perfect thing is when I do it on my laptop and nobody sees it, and I call it perfect. It worked perfectly. Right. So I appreciate talking about both the good things and the bad things about the environments, because it's really important to understand, to help people formulate the best way of managing tools. And sometimes the cons can actually be more powerful than the pros. And so I appreciate us talking about that.
I think effectively that's what makes a good software vendor. It's not necessarily the product, but also the support that comes with it. And like you said, no product is perfect, but if the vendors are happy to work with their clients and improve on it and move things forward, I think those, to me, make the best vendors. And like you were saying, Kong has a really good support system. They have some really good engineers. And I know from experience, because I manage a number of enterprise clients at Kong, that we work with the customers with their needs. And if this effectively, feeds its way back into the product and helps everyone else in the interim as well. So I think having that kind of relationship between the users of the platform and the platform itself, I think, are essential as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, having that support group, and we've got a stellar one as well, is just another proof of why Kong and Wallarm are just so customer focused, right? It is just our customer is all that we have, and without them, we are a product sitting on a shelf. And so for both of us, we are so customer focused, and I think that's one of the big reasons why we get along so well is because we're looking at what our customers are asking both of us and going, how do we do this better? How do we do this differently? What can we provide back to our mutual customers that will really help? And so, that's really cool. I guess, Gigi, you talked about some of your experiences, which is great. And I appreciate the comments about the support groups. I think that's really great. So I think we may have a couple of questions if you guys want to move on to some questions from the group.
Yeah, so I got a couple that I prompted on LinkedIn that have come through in the past couple minutes. I'll get to those right now. And for those of you on the Zoom webinar, if you go in the Q&A, if any of this conversation has spurred a comment or a question, feel free to throw it in there and we'll answer it. So the questions, actually I got two of them from Ravi, Solutions Architect. His first one is, or I'll do these in reverse. Because I still have it up. In the displayed architecture, what is the average latency induced by Wallarm for this end-to-end performance, right? So we're talking here, Gigi added the additional layer, what is the latency there? And if we went back to the earlier one where they were kind of in the same layer, what would be kind of the impact to that?
Yeah, Gigi, did you measure this at all in your environment?
I don't have the production metrics because we haven't gone into production, but UAT, the latency is pretty low, lower than two milliseconds or something like that.
Yeah. I think a lot depends on what your architecture looks like. This is a great high level design, but I am sure there's probably a few more boxes underneath this and maybe a few more clouds inside of AWS and maybe regions. So I think a lot depends on what your final, implementation architecture looks like. But usually we're saying, at least from what I've seen, 2 milliseconds at the most. A lot, but again, a lot depends on, where these are located and what sits behind Wallarm. But usually 2 or 3 milliseconds is what we're seeing. So I think there is some latency that you'll add, and so there's some complexity that you'll add with configs, but ultimately you get the visibility of layer by layer, and a lot of customers are actually like that visibility by layer.
Okay. And then he also asks, it says, is it safe to assume that the customer has to be familiar with Docker and K8 to deploy Kong and Wallarm together, or are there other options?
I think yeah, go ahead, Gigi.
No, I was about to say that in our case, Kong was on Kubernetes and Wallarm was on ECS. But when we were reviewing the deployment options, there seemed to be a good amount of options of doing this in non-Kubernetes as well, right? So you can do this in a non-Kubernetes way as well. So Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I was going to ask Andrew, what's your deployment methodology look like?
No, I was going to say exactly that. I think effectively, because Wallarm is an Nginx module, you can, wherever you can deploy Nginx, you can deploy Wallarm effectively. Kong can be deployed on anything from, sort of VM, bare metal, to Kubernetes. So, I don't think it necessarily means you have to. I think it just seems to be the way the industry is going, where the majority of companies are moving towards, sort of containerized platforms. So that's probably the most common way of doing it. But I think if you wanted to do something on bare metal or VM, it would be pretty easy to configure that as well.
All right, and actually back to the original question, it kind of stirred a follow-up, which I think, Tim, you like. Is it safe to say deploying Wallarm in a sideband mode with Kong API Gateway is a safer way to go for latency-sensitive APIs?
So we're gonna get into some hair splitting here. So
Yeah.
yeah. So did you say sidecar or
No,
so?
sideband mode. He didn't say a sidecar, but so
Okay,
I'll let
yeah,
you.
We'll go through a couple of these then. So
Exactly.
so we have we can implement in the ingress controller. Will it be faster? More than likely, the answer is yes. If we are integrated with the Kong ingress controller, safe to say it's probably going to be faster. But the question becomes is how much are those milliseconds worth to you? If you want more visibility and the ability to have layers of security, are your APIs going to notice a few milliseconds? And I don't know. That answer is going to be yes or no, or maybe depending on the customers. And I think there's a number of deployment options that we have. We've actually got a sidecar deployment methodology as well that we can use. Yep. So it's not just what you see here. It's not just the ingress controller. Probably our most popular one is integrated into the Kong ingress controller in your golden image, but it doesn't have to be, right? So that's the flexibility of Kong. That's the flexibility of Wallarm, and why we work so well together, because the question is what do you want to do and where do you want to go, and we'll figure out how to get you there.
I think effectively what you need to do is work out what are your requirements first before even going, which deployment option should I go with? Understand what your requirements are. Like I was saying, what's your sensitivity to latency? Looking at the services that are going through this, that are going to be, in your upstreams, and understand like what are their requirements as well. And based on that information, you can then decide, and I guess effectively test as well, is always the best thing, so.
Double check. Don't seem to have any questions here in Zoom. I'll give it one more minute on the LinkedIn side. If there are any further questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I can wrap this up.
Gigi, I've got a question for you actually.
Yep.
Not to put you on the spot. What kind of throughputs do you see here? What's the sort of TPS have you been testing through your platform?
I don't have the answer to that. I don't have a ready answer to that, but I could email you that.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just kind of interested. Yeah.
Cool. All right, I think we can wrap up a little early. So to learn more about this, so again, like we said, this all kind of stemmed from Giju writing a blog on his experience on implementing Kong and Wallarm. So each of us individually were familiar with Giju, but then this kind of helped pull all of us together. So you can read that blog that he wrote. We have that posted on our blog, as well as in this slide deck, we will have links to both the integration pages on the Kong site and on the Wallarm site. So you can kind of read through the documentation, get familiar. And I would say last but not least, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either of us on our website, or you'll have all of our names here. Be more than happy to reach out to us on LinkedIn. We love these types of conversations. I hope the feeling you got from this is we are both companies are very customer focused and actually like the challenges. So if you got a challenging deployment, throw it at us. All of you, both from the LinkedIn side and on here on Zoom, will receive again a copy of these slides as well as a copy of the recording. Please feel free to share. And we look forward to doing many more of these webinars, particularly with our friends at Kong. Giju, again, thank you for joining us. Andrew, always a pleasure to see you. Tim, thanks for your time. And everyone, have a safe and happy holidays.
Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.